Now that we already have all the elements we need, we're going to start building our story one wall at a time. We're going to do the example with a linear story, simply because they are more complex to architect, but later we'll also look into nonlinear. If you already working with a nonlinear story, try to come up with an example for a linear one, because I'm sure that this is going to be really useful for you at some point. And later, as I said, we also look at an example of a nonlinear story. So let's get started. So let's remember, first of all, my story, the example that we're going to follow. My story was Chasing the Moon, which follows Mike, a sports photographer that's obsessed with the space. After taking an awakening picture of the moon during a 49ers game, he wins a NASA photography contest. Then he's invited to join a spatial trip to the moon. Also, let's remember my settings. I had four, which were the 49ers stadium, where my story starts. Then we had the NASA headquarters, the spaceship, and finally the moon. As per characters, I had Mike, the photographer, Sarah, an astronaut, and Paul, that was Mike's assistant. But also, let's remember that I have decided that I want my audience to see the wall and live the experience from Mike's assistant's point of view. Therefore, Paul is going to have no relevance as a character on his own because his role is going to be taken by the audience. Let's also remember that my story is cinematic versus a more game type of experience. Also, that is going to be done in animation versus live action. That the weight of the action is going to be held by the audience decisions, and that the key actions within each wall won't happen until my audience is ready to look at them. As per the audience, they are going to be free to walk around as well as interact with a few objects. Also, each wall is going to be increasingly more interactive. As per tools, I'm going to use a set of circles, which there is a template available for you in the internet that you can download if you want to use them. Remember that each circle is not a physical representation of that story wall, for example, the stadium, but it's rather a conceptual tool to design the experience from an audience standpoint. So first step, I set a circle to represent each wall of experience. Remember that in my story there were four walls of experience, and the size of the circles represent the order in which the audience stepped into them. So the smallest will be the first wall where my audience will step into, and the largest one, the last one, so the moon in my case. Right now, we're going to start a brainstorming session. The first part of it, divergence, which means that we need to let all of our ideas out. We're going to take the first wall, which is the smallest one, and next to it, we're going to stick I don't know, maybe a little post-it or whatever, where we can write in one side characters' actions and on the other side audience actions. For characters' actions, we're going to start writing down all of these actions that our actors could potentially perform into that wall. And we're going to do the same for the audience. In that case, what the audience is allowed to do can relate to the characters if they can listen to them or maybe follow them, and also relate to all the actions that they could potentially do just for the fact that they are in this environment. In that case, all the things that someone could do just because he's in a stadium. So for example, here in my first world, the notes that I'm taking that my characters could do, in my case I only have Mike, is that Mike could explain your passion to Paul, which is the assistant, which is also the audience, or Mike could be simply taking pictures, which is his job, or also Mike, I don't know, he could be eating a hot dog, could be walking around the field. Also, the 49ers are playing. I don't only have to write down actions from my main characters, but also maybe some secondary characters that might exist in that wall. Also, Mike might be telling Paul about tonight's eclipse. For the audience, I have written down that I could be looking through my camera because I've imagined that Paul, the character, but also who the audience is impersonating, might have a camera hanging from his neck, so you can use it and interact with the camera. You can also listen to Mike, you can watch the match, you can look for the clips, you can walk around the field, and you can watch Mike taking pictures. So I just taken a few notes for each just because I didn't have more space, but I will actually advise you to take many more. I would say at least 15, 20 per each. Now let's move on into the second phase of this brainstorming session, which is convergence. This is when I'm going to start selecting the ideas that I like and the ones that I don't like. For example, in my case, I feel that there is three ideas that bring no value in, so I discard them. It will be, for example, I don't think that Mike eating a hot dog brings in any value because in the VR experience, my audience won't be able to eat a hot dog, so why should Mike do it? Also, I don't want Mike to walk around the field because I think it might be distracting from the audience to miss the important point, which in my case will be the clips, so we will look into that later. And also for the audience actions, I also discard the fact that the audience can walk too much around the field because I think it's also distracting. So I think there is enough things that my audience can do without walking too much. So I also discard that idea. So how do I translate this into the circle? Into the circle, in the first place, I will only translate the audience actions. The audience actions are always taking into consideration the character's actions, because, for example, one of them is that I can listen to Mike. But I will only translate the experiential capacities of my audience into that wall. Also, in that wall, I will use the north to indicate the action, which will be the starting point of that wall for the audience. For example, in my case, for the festival, it will be to watch the match. Because what I imagine is that whenever the audience puts on the headset, the first thing that's going to be in front of them is going to be the match. So now I'm going to start putting the rest of my selected actions in a wall around the user. So for example, I have watch the match, that was my starting one, watch Mike taking pictures, listen to Mike, look for the clips, and also look through your camera. At this point, you don't need to put them in any given order. Maybe, for example, I've put listen to Mike and look for the eclipse because I imagine that both actions will be quite linked. But don't worry about this. Just place your selected actions into the different worlds. So let's move into the second one. Here I've also done my brainstorming. So for characters actions, I have Mike meets Sarah, Mike receives the award, Mike walks along the corridor where the other pictures are also exhibited, Mike makes a speech, also Sarah invites them to the space, and also Mike cries. And for the audience actions, I have that I can walk along the corridor, I can look at the winning picture, which is the one that Mike took at the game, and I can also, of course, look at the other pictures. I can follow Mike, I can follow Sarah, I can engage on scientist conversations that I imagine they might be there for the award ceremony. And I can also engage on Mike's and Sarah conversation. When it came to the convergence phase, I decided to discard my crying because I think this won't bring too much value into the story and just too much drama. So I take it off. Also, for the audience actions, I have follow Sarah taken off because I think that at this moment she's not going to be that relevant to the story yet, and I don't want to distract too much my audience. So I place these 5 actions that I have selected around my user, and I move to the third wall. Here I'm going to skip the ideation phase and just show you the actions that I have selected. So in the first place, I have explored the control system, which is my starting action. Look at the space from the window, look at the moon from the window. Engage on Mike and Sarah conversation and listen to Sarah. And finally, on the moon, my starting action is going to be look at the earth from the moon, watch Mike and Sarah kissing, meet an alien, and explore the moon. So now it's time for you to start doing the same. And as an advice, I will tell you that when you're doing the first brainstorming about the characters and the audience actions, please don't limit yourself. Like really try to think of as many actions as possible because as you have seen later on, you will have time to discard them. So thank you so much, and I see you in the next chapter.